Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructive Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at puremtgo.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructiveCriticism.com.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 101 of the Common Knowledge Podcast. I am your host, Christian, and as always, I am joined by my charming co-host, Colton. How's it going, Colton?
Good. How are you, Christian?
Doing well, thank you. Before we get too far into this episode, I just want to remind everyone that Common Knowledge and all of the podcasts on the Constructive Criticism Network are sponsored by puremtgo.com. If you want to support the show, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Constructive Criticism YouTube channel, and check out our Patreon. With that out of the way, let's get on to the podcast. So the first thing that I sort of want to say really quickly is just reminding everybody that we do have a Pauper Showcase qualifier coming up on Sunday, May 3rd. That'll be at 10 a.m. Pacific time.
Mm-hmm.
But with that out of the way, what did we want to talk about this week, Colton?
So for this episode, I know it's episode 101. So I kind of wanted to make something that fit around the theme of something, the basics, And so we titled this episode, of course, Back to Basics. So I decided I kind of want to talk a little bit, something that's been on my mind for a little while, especially as I've been trying to brew more decks, is mana bases and mana fixing in Pauper.
Yeah, so what specifically about them?
So in Pauper, one of the biggest challenges is that in this format, we often don't get things like dual lands or fetch lands or anything like that, like they do in other formats such as Standard or Pioneer or Modern, to help us fix our mana really in our lands really easily. And so we have to kind of find ways that we can fix our mana that still work for us, but they aren't going to be perfect, but the ways that we can still get our mana consistently. I like to think of as I've been building more decks, I've been considering Pauper decks more closely, especially in mana, more closely related to limited decks than to other constructed format decks like Standard or Modern.
Yeah, definitely. And it's really important to make sure that you have good mana, because the baseline for every deck is having it. But I definitely agree that you have to consider it more like a limited deck, that if your mana is going to be able to stretch your mana base, your deck, to where you can do more things, you have to consider that you're taking some turns of the game off, because you're just not going to be able to play like a shock land or whatever.
Mm-hmm. So I kind of wrote down 3 primary ways that we can fix our mana. There are a couple of other niche ways that are used in 1 or 2 decks, but I kind of want to go over 3 of the most common ways that are used to fix mana in our format. And the first one is just using tapped dual lands. The 2 primary ones that are used in Pauper are the so-called gain lands and the so-called bounce lands. So the gain lands were originally printed, I think, during the cons block, and they enter the battlefield tapped. They give 2 colors of mana, and when they enter the battlefield, they give you 1 life. So these are just mostly used because they're just kind of the best option out of your regular comes into play tapped land that is at common level, because it gives you free life, which is, better than doing nothing. And the other type of land that's most commonly used is called the bounce lands or the Karoo lands, and these are originally printed back in Ravnica block, but they've been printed a ton of times. They're in a master sets or in commander decks and stuff like that, and so they enter the battlefield tapped as well. But when they enter the battlefield, you have to return a land you control back to your hand. But the upside to these lands is that they give you two colors, one of each. So say it's like the blue black one, it gives you, when you tap it, it gives you one blue and one black. Or if it's the red green one, it gives you one red and one green, so on and so forth.
Yeah, so what are like why would you play one over the other, I guess?
So the bounce lands are most commonly seen in more grindy, really, really grindy mid-range and control decks, and decks that can really utilize the bouncing back to your hand. So some of the most common things that are common ways that it's used in in the blue-black control deck, they'll play a one of Radiant Fountain that is just a colorless land that when it enters the battlefield it gains you 2 life. So if you use that plus the blue-black bounce land, you can play the Radiant Fountain, gain 2 life, bounce it back to your hand with the bounce land to gain another 2 life. And that can be a really, really big game against some of the really, really fast decks in the format, like Elves or Burn or something like that, and help you stabilize so that you can get your game plan going and make sure that you just don't die to the aggro deck really quickly.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so one of the downsides of playing the like bounce lando over the game land, I just wanted to say for those that don't know, is that whenever you play the bounce land, sometimes you're just taking like your turn 2 off, and in Pauper, turn 2 is so much more important than turn 1.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be like a reason to play the game land if you like didn't feel comfortable letting your deck always take turn 2 off to
Yeah.
fix your mana sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So the gain lands are usually best on turn 1 most commonly. They're usually used. I've seen them in control decks alongside bounce lands, but I've also seen them in the really grindy decks. But I usually see them in more of the mid range decks, and not as much in just like you won't see um you won't see them in super fast decks usually, but you usually see them in decks that are okay taking one turn off to try to make sure that they have both of their colors.
Yeah, so like a good example of this would be like the Tron deck, right? That like the only colored lands it plays other than the Caves of Temptation, I'm pretty sure, or just the Tranquil Coves, which is the blue-white one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also blue black also utilizes the gain lands too. The Monarch decks will use it. It can also sometimes be a little useful if you really need a little life gain to use them with the bounce lands. Um, One of the biggest downsides to the bounce lands as opposed to the gain lands is that it sometimes makes your hands worse. You have to mulligan sometimes more because opening double bounce land, you can't do anything. Or opening a tap land plus a bounce land is just really bad. So sometimes you can mix them. Usually there are very few decks I've seen that it will put 4 of both in, but I have seen a couple that do, but they like really, really utilize the bounce and stuff like that. But typically you're going to try to go with one or the other unless you're a really, really, really slow deck. Because the bounce lands really do make your hands clunky.
Yeah, so it gets like I guess if you are playing a deck that has like 25 or 26 lands, that's
Mhm.
when you would start getting into the territory of playing both. But outside of that, it's usually not recommended, I don't think.
No, especially since making sure that you're not getting too far behind on mana is one of the big things about Pauper because this format is all about incremental advantage, and losing your incremental advantage because of too many tap lands can really hurt your game plan.
Right. Um, but anyway, so outside of like the tap duels, are there any other like what's like the next way to fix our mana, I guess?
So the next way to fix our mana is with what I like to call land fetching. And so there's a couple ways to do this. There's the primarily non-green deck way to do it, and then the green deck way to do it. So the non-green decks will use cards such as Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse, and Ash Barrens. Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, they're just a land that you tap and sacrifice it, and you search for any basic land and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Pretty simple. Evolving Wilds has been reprinted a billion jillion times. It's seen some standard play in the past. It sees play in limited all the time as a pretty good mana fixer. And then Ash Barrens is a colorless land that enters the battlefield untapped and it'll just give you colorless mana, or you can pay 1 and it has basic land cycling. So what that does is you pay 1, discard it, and then you search your library for any basic land and add it to your hand. So most commonly, these are used in decks that are really imbalanced in their mana needs. So gain lands and bounce lands are used more where you're pretty even on, like, say, your red and white, or pretty even on your blue and black, or pretty even on your green and black and whatever. The Evolving Wilds and Ash Barrens and Terramorphic Expanses are typically used in decks such as Scred or things like that, where you're really only splashing a second color. It's meant so that you only have to play like 2 or 3 maybe of your other color basic land, and then you still have access to it. But like your Ash Barrens and Evolving Wilds can still go get your islands too. So it helps fix your mana and make sure that your splash will work, but also like won't kill you with tempo disadvantage.
Yeah. So there are like a few other reasons to use them. I think Scred is probably like the best example, just because like they get a little bit better if you're playing like a lot of cantrips, or if you're playing, I think, a deck with like a few singletons or whatever, they can get a little bit better, because sometimes like you have to bottom stuff either from like your mulligans, or like I said, like cantrips or whatever, that eventually you're going to want back into your deck. And so just having a way to shuffle them back in so you have a chance of drawing them is also like a powerful advantage to those.
Yeah, if you're playing cards like Brainstorm, having these is extremely important. If you notice in Pauper that Brainstorm is legal but never really sees play as a 4 of, and the reason for that is that these are available and they're nice, but you can't always rely on having one every single turn like you could in a format such as Legacy, a way to fix the top of your library. The other really useful thing that these cards are really good for is if you're playing cards like Gurmag Angler or Hooting Mandrills, where you're just trying to dump as much crap in your graveyard as possible so that you can get a really big fishy boy or a big monkey boy, a really big monkey on the table, so that you can attack your opponent for a lot of damage by paying little mana.
Yeah, for sure. That is like, I don't know, like, I've been playing like a lot of the like Black Red Reanimator deck, and like being able to add Ash Barrens to your Gurmag Angler math is sometimes like, it's like such a big difference, whether that be like post board if you're wanting to hold up like a Pyroblast, or like pre board whenever you're just trying to go as quickly as possible. Like, I don't know, that card already being one of the best cards in Pauper, usually whenever you have a card that's so ubiquitously good, that means that anything that you can do to make it even better is just so valuable.
Yeah, just being able to get free value is also really, really good.
So that's the like non-green way, and then you mentioned that there was like a green way to do this.
Yeah, so green gets to play cards like in the Elves deck. They get to play the card Sylvan Rangers. That when it's a 1/1 for 1 in a green, that when it enters the battlefield, you get to search for your library for any basic land and add it to your hand. So green is the color of ramp, and so green decks can play cards like that can either tutor out your basic lands and add them to your hand, or you can play cards like Sakura Tribe Elder and Rampant Growth if you would like to tutor out that color and put it right onto the battlefield. The reason why the Elves deck plays the Ranger is that so the deck plays a singular island in the entire list, and there's only like 15 lands in the entire deck. And so the reason why they play one island is for the card Distant Melody. That is, I believe, 3 and a blue, and you draw cards equal to the number of one type of creature on the battlefield. So if you have like 10 elves, you draw 10 cards. It's pretty insane. So they play that card just to have the flexibility of sometimes the deck has really, really low land count. So sometimes they just need to find like their third land. Sometimes it's not very common, but more often than not, they just need to find the one of island that they don't really want in their opening hand, because Elves' game plan is typically turn 1, play a forest, play a Llanowar or Elvish Mystic, and then turn 2, play more elves, and then turn 3, play more elves. Just like spread the board with a whole bunch of mana elves. So they can splash a color just like that. Sometimes I've seen in rare instances people will splash like black or red or whatever. Most often you'll see blue, but very very seldomly you'll see other colors just because they only have to play the one of land in their deck, and most of the time you're not going to get it into your hand. So in your opening hand, so they can just fetch for it when they need it.
Right. Yeah. So we talked about all of the ways, like with like tap dual lands and with land fetching, like all of the like lands that do stuff. But now I think it's time that we talk about everyone's favorite way to fix your mana.
Yes, we got to Tron. So the third way that people fix their mana in Pauper is with artifacts, most commonly with the card Prophetic Prism. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with this card, Prophetic Prism is 2 generic mana. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and you pay a mana, and you tap it, and it makes 1 mana of any color. So you can put whatever color mana you want into it, and it'll spit out whatever color that you want out of it. So, to tell you how good this effect is, last year in Modern Horizons, Wizards printed another card similar to this called Arkham's Astrolabe. And it costs 1 snow mana, and it does the exact same thing. That card got banned out of Pauper within, I think, 3 or 4 months, because that card just ruined the format. It was horrible. And Prophetic Prism currently, as when I checked last, is the second most played non-creature spell in the entire format. So that tells you how good this card is. Most commonly, you'll see this card either in Monarch style decks like Boros Monarch. They can get not only the value from color fixing, but can also bounce it back and replay it to keep drawing more cards. Or in any deck that plays usually 3 or more colors. If you're playing 3 or more colors, and you're not playing Prophetic Prism, chances are your deck is going to struggle a lot with its mana. So Prophetic Prism is why decks like Affinity and Tron can be essentially 3-color decks that are 5-color decks.
Right. So they can play like the example is this. We also talked about it last week. Is that like the Affinity deck is mostly seen as like a blue-green red deck, but like in its sideboard and sometimes in the main deck, it just gets to play like random like black and white cards just because of how powerful Prophetic Prism is.
Yeah. So this card is really, really good. The big downside to playing Prophetic Prism is it does mean you have to take turn 2 off. So usually you won't see Prophetic Prism in faster decks. If you're playing like a really fast 2-color deck, you'll typically see either a couple of gain lands or a couple of fetch lands and ash barrens and stuff like that. A couple of evolving wilds, because taking turn 2 off is a pretty big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sort of like the same thing, albeit less bad as the like Karoo land difference. I will say the one difference here is at least Prophetic Prism gives you inherent value no matter what on turn 2, because at least it replaces itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's super, super big.
And then one of the other things that I think you commonly see, the like 2-color decks that play Prophetic Prism also have like other ways to abuse it, either like bouncing it back to their hand or sacrificing it for value, sometimes both.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at you, Boros Monarch.
Yeah, that deck just likes to bounce it back and forth and keep drawing cards and keep drawing cards and keep drawing cards and keep drawing cards. It's really good in that.
And sacrifice it to Galvanic Blast.
Not Galvanic, Shrapnel Blast.
Yeah, sorry.
Galvanic Blast.
And Galvanic Blast, it just it ups the artifact count for Galvanic Blast.
Also getting to sacrifice it to your ATOG to deal two more damage. It's great. So there are other, like I said earlier, there are other niche ways that decks will fix their mana. In Elves, they get to play special Elves that they can tap and make colors of other mana. And in Bogles, they get to play enchantments that they put on their land to turn it into a rainbow land. They could make any of the 5 colors. But typically, those are really, really niche ways that you can fix your mana. So I just kind of wanted to focus on the three major ways, especially if you guys out there are brewing, to like to just to just ways to consider to help improve your mana base so that your deck will work and function better.
Yeah, there is one other way that is like sort of a major way to fix your mana base that I want to talk about. If that's all right.
Hmm.
The one other major way is to just not play multiple colors.
Yep.
Um, so mono red burn, the mono blue delver, and the reason that I think that these decks have so much success is because they don't have to take turns off to
Hmm.
set up. So even if they sacrifice power level by like just not getting to play as good of cards as like Tron does or Boros Monarch does, because they don't have to take the time setting up, they can get their game plan going faster. And that's like one of the ways that you can beat those decks. And honestly, that would be one of the ways if I was brewing, like I would think about trying to play monocolor decks to prey on the Prophetic Prism decks.
Yeah. So the thing with one of the things with Magic is that as your consistency, you have two things. You have consistency and you have power. And usually when one goes up, the other goes down. In terms of constructed deck building. This is not always the case. Sometimes you pick better cards and better cards come along. But with colors specifically, as you add more colors, your power goes up, but your consistency goes down.
Right.
And in other formats can kind of deal with that because you get to play cards like shock lands or fetch lands and whatever other dual lands are available in the format. But in our format, we don't really get to do that. So that's why decks like mono green aggro and elves that just has like a singular blue splash in it for one card, and mono red burn and red deck wins have been big decks in the format for so long is because they're just that consistent. They do one thing, they do it really well, and it's not the most powerful or flashy thing usually, but it gets the job done and it gets it done consistently.
Yeah. And building off of this, that's also like something that you see out of the like really good like two color decks in the format.
Mm-hmm.
Is that they find ways to work their fixing into their primary game plan. Again, not to like keep harping on the deck or whatever, but like Boros Monarch is like honestly like the prime example of that,
Mm-hmm.
where like their mana fixing also progresses their game plan. Bogles is also an example, right, where they play their enchantment to progress their game plan as well
Mm-hmm.
as fix their mana.
If any of you guys have never Stone Rained the Bogus player on one land that has 3 enchantments, it's the best feeling in the world. You got to do it at least once. You'll probably lose, but it feels great to see them go, oh crap.
But yeah,
All right.
so those are like all the main ways to fix their mana. Are there any other like niche ways that you wanted to talk about or anything?
No, those are the ones I think I wanted to cover this week.
Alrighty. So next, I just wanted to sort of talk about something for a second. I'm sort of getting into like what my match of the week was. For me, this week it's a lot less of like a really good match that I had, um, more of a singular decision point within that match. So I again have been playing the red black reanimator deck, and I finally ran into the mirror on Magic Online. And the most interesting decision that I think I made, despite the games being incredibly challenging, was in sideboarding. So usually the red black reanimator deck has like a few mid-rangey cards in the sideboard, and I didn't know whether or not it would be correct to bring those in, but I did anyways, and so I brought those in, and I took out some exhumes. And the reason that I did that was because I sort of felt like the game would revolve around the card Stinkweed Imp, because Stinkweed Imp profitably blocks most of the big stuff. The only thing that it really doesn't still block that well is Ulamog's Crusher, because Ulamog's Crusher, like even though it kills it once, you have to sacrifice lands typically to do that, and then you
Mm-hmm.
can't keep recasting your Stinkweed Imp. So that means the second time your opponent goes off, they probably win the game. um, but because like I felt like the game would sort of revolve around Stinkweed Imp, I felt like it would be better to bring in my card of choice was Thorn of the Black Rose, and then also cut my exhumes because I didn't want the game to be solely about my graveyard anymore. But I have no idea whether it was correct, and I really wanted to get your opinion on it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think playing Graveyard Hate, I think playing mid-range cards is probably okay. I'm also just making sure that you have better you have good graveyard hate to counter their game plan, and sometimes like working off their exhumes is fine. Like personally in that mirror match, my favorite card of all time is Fairy Macabre, just because you can get them. I mean, they go exhume and you're like, cool, Fairy Macabre, your targets are gone. They're like, oh crap. I just
Yeah.
I gave you even like a 5/5 for no mana on your part. Like that's so good.
So my like getcha card of choice, I'm actually playing it in the main deck, is Shred Memory, which is the like black and one instant that you can exile 4 cards out of target player's graveyard. But it also transmutes for a different 2-drop, which is it's like I get to play that in the main deck to just like go get like Exhume or like the like Cathartic Reunion or whatever, like the missing piece a lot of times.
Hmm.
Um, but Fairy Macabre would also be a good way. And I think if my build was like more of like a turbo build where like you were uncomfortable committing mana a lot of the times, that would have been the card that I went with over the Shred Memory.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just my opinion. Like I haven't really seen the list, or I'd have to probably watch the game to figure out how I would board. But that's just my opinion.
Um, well, if any of the listeners like at home have their opinion on what they like to do or what they think they would like to do, I'm gonna post the list on my Twitter, and then you can definitely shoot us an email and just let me know what I was doing wrong, what I should change, or whether you thought that I was 110% correct. But speaking of sideboarding, every week we like to sort of pick out our favorite sideboard cards. And so, Colton, what sideboard cards do you like this week?
So I actually went and I was digging around some of my cards. Let me see if I have it in this pile. Oh, I don't have it in this pile. But anyway, I found a foil version of the card that I forgot that I had that I wanted to talk about this week, and that card is Gutshot. So for those of you who don't know, Gutshot is a Phyrexian red mana. So you either pay 2 life or a singular red mana, and simple card deals 1 damage to any target. That's it. So I've been really high on this card, especially as I've been trying to work on Infect recently. Because one of the biggest struggles that Infect has is getting little blockers out of the way so they can get the Glistener Elf in for those last couple points of damage. And Gutshot is like a free way to do that. It's also really, really good against Infect, surprisingly, because you can just turn 1, kill their elf, and keep your game plan going. One of the reasons I really like this card is it's splashable in just a wide variety of decks. I mean, I looked on Goldfish and I think there were like at least 6 or 8 different decks that currently have it in the sideboard, just because this card is so versatile. You don't need to pay mana for it. You can just pay 2 life. Typically I've seen this card in a little bit faster decks. It's not quite as good in slower decks because you have other more powerful options to get removal going. And in those decks, especially against more aggressive decks, you don't really want to have to pay that much life if you don't have to. But if you're playing a deck like, I've seen it played in Burn, I've seen it played in some of the tempo lists. I've wanted to try it in the sideboard of Mono Blue Delver, just because the deck has some removal, but not all of it is permanent. And sometimes just like even killing the 1/1, if especially against decks that rely so much on their 1/1 on turn 1 or 2, so like Elves or Infect, or even in the mirror match Delver, that card can just be a total blowout where you just kill their thing for no mana.
Yeah, so to me, like you said, a lot of the power level of the card comes from you don't have to commit mana to it. So that means you can progress what you're doing in these aggressive decks and still interact with your opponent in some way.
Mm-hmm. And it can also allow for some really big blowouts. One of my favorite gut shots I've done is it can be really good against the heroic deck, especially against their flyer, where you sometimes they'll just go the flyer and you're just like, cool. Sometimes you can get them on try to attach an aura to it. You can gut shot them and just 2 for 1 of them. But sometimes, getting the 1/1 out of the air for no mana and being able to continue your game plan and pressure them, rather than allowing them, you like lightning bolt or doomblade their guy, you still took a turn off and they get to replay their next dude and then start stacking auras on it, and you're now a turn behind. But with Gutshot, you can kill their flyer, keep your game plan going, and start pressuring them. And the next turn, they play their next guy, and you're already ahead, and you can go ahead and kill their guy and start swinging for damage.
Yeah, that's a big agree. Right now, I am also pretty high on Gutshot. I think people should at least be experimenting with it in their deck sideboard.
Mm-hmm.
So my sideboard card of the week is, I guess, sort of similar in that they're both removal. So I was sort of looking around at the metagame, and right now the Boros and Mardu Monarch decks make up close to 20% as we record. And so that sort of had me thinking that like I wanted to talk about a Wrath. And so like the two that I had in my mind were Swirling Sandstorm and Evankar's Justice. But as I thought about it more, Evankar's Justice is good at killing like some of their earlier plays, so like their flyers and stuff that just have like 1 or 2 toughness. Whereas Swirling Sandstorm is really good against the later half of their deck. So like the Palace Sentinels is like a good example.
Mm-hmm.
But neither card was good against all of their deck.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a little bit more digging, and I decided that my favorite card that would be like a sweeper is actually probably Crypt Rats if I'm expecting to play against a lot of the Monarch style decks. And that's because this card hits all of them. So there are a few downsides, most notably that the Boros and Mardu decks are a little bit more aggressively slanted, and this does hit both players. So that means that you're going to want to play like some sort of life gain probably in your deck. So I would pair this in like a Gray Merchant deck or like any of the like green-black like value decks that play like Golgari Brown Scale. That's where like I think you should. And then I would still consider it in other black decks that didn't have the life gain, but I wouldn't be as high on it, I guess.
Yeah. One big pro about this card is that it does come down a turn earlier before a card like Pestilence does. So you can start killing stuff a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I guess that would be another good deck, the Black-White Pestilence deck. I'm sure they already play it, though, in the main deck, probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it does come down a turn earlier than the Pestilence, and you can play it on an empty board, too. Well, you can't do that with the Pestilence.
And then another good thing is like sometimes you just need like a 3-mana blocker to get you to whatever your turn 4 is, and it can also do that.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of this card all around.
Yeah.
But anyways,
the only downside I have to this card is that you have to most of the time play it on turn 3 and hope it survives till turn 4, and that's never a good feeling, waiting for something to survive a turn.
that's also true.
But yeah, this card's especially good. I've seen it a lot in the white-black decks, and those decks are currently, I think, they're like okay. Their biggest upside right now is that they're really, really good against the blue-black decks and the Tron decks, just because they get to play so much exile, so much exiling discard, so like the Castigates and the Memory Leaks and stuff like that. They do struggle against, I think, some of the more aggro-y decks, so I think they need to be playing more Crypt Rats. And just the fact that you get to play like Lone Missionaries and stuff like that for no cost, pretty much, just gaining that life and keeping your life a little bit ahead of the aggro deck is pretty big game.
I agree. That might be the next deck that we experiment with, actually, now that we talk about it. It sounds like a lot of fun.
It's a pretty fun deck to play. It's not super fun to play against, but it's pretty fun to play.
Yeah, well, with that, was there any other thing that you wanted to touch on this week?
Nope, I think that'll do it for me this week.
Alrighty, then that is also going to do it for this week's episode of Common Knowledge. If you guys wanted to get in touch with us, you can find me on Twitter at JustGuyDad, or you can find Colton on Twitter at BoltSnapBaral. or you can just shoot us an email over at commonknowledgemtg@gmail.com. If you have any questions on the Popper format, MTGO, or anything else, you can go ahead and email us or just leave a comment down below. Also, if you had any comments on the Black Red Reanimator deck, you can also just send us something on Twitter or an email, and we'll definitely respond. But anyways, thanks again to our sponsor, PureMTGO.com, as well as the Constructive Criticism Network for letting us be a part of it. And last but certainly not least, be good to each other, and thank you all for listening.
Bye, guys.